The Rebbe says that we discussed many times regarding that which the Shalah says, that the parshas of the Torah have a connection to the time of the year when they are being read and when they are being learnt. It's understood that the same thing is true regarding parshas Matos-Massei, that their kviyas, the time that they are read, is always in the time of the Bein HaMetzarim, in the 3 weeks. So obviously they have a special connection to the Teichen, to the content of what the Bein HaMetzarim, the 3 weeks, is all about. Now simply, we see the connection to Bein HaMetzarim in a number of details. The Rebbe says, first of all, in Parshas Matos, Moshe Rabbeinu is reminding the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven about the Aveira of the Meraglim, because of which the Yidden remained in the desert for 40 years, which is very similar to the whole idea of the fact that we are in Golus, which starts in the time of Bein HaMetzarim. The Rebbe says in Parshas Massei it's recorded regarding the journeys that the Yidden take from Mitzrayim going to Eretz Yisrael, as it says in the Medrash that Hashem says to Moshe, enumerate all of the different places where it is that the Yidden got me angry. This is what Eila Masei B'nai Yisrael is all about. So again, this is the whole reason for why we have the 3 weeks in Golus, is because of the Averis that the Yidden did. So another connection. Further, says the Rebbe in the Parsha, it discusses the concept of the Ori Miklat, the city of refuge, where a person that killed someone by mistake goes to Golus. So here again is the idea and the connection to the concept of Golus. The Rebbe says, another connection that we see is as the Shalah explains. The Shalah says that the ideas that are discussed in Parshas Matos, it discusses the idea of Nidorim, of vows, and Shavuot, taking an oath, and swearing. So when one does it in the wrong way, it's poigim, it causes a blemish in the neshama. And in Parshas Massei, it discusses the dinim of the aveira of murder, which causes a blemish in the physical body. And these two ideas, the aveiris that cause a blemish in the neshama and in the body, this is what caused the churban of the Batei Mikdash, as the Shalah explains at length. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, we could say that the connection to these parshiyos of Bein HaMetzarim is not only to the concept of Golus, which is hinted in these parshiyos, as just discussed, but on the contrary, that the parshiyos are a nesinas koyach, they give us the ability to do our avodah during the time of Bein HaMetzarim, to be able to go out of Golus. And this is what the Rebbe is going to focus on in our Sicha. The Rebbe says the explanation is, just like simply all of the dinim of Avelus, in the time of the Bein HaMetzarim, so we know they don't apply at all on Shabbos, in which you're not allowed to be sad. On the contrary, mitzvah la'ango, you're supposed to have pleasure on Shabbos and so on. Which from this we see that the idea of Shabbos is a space that, so to speak, the whole idea of Bein HaMetzarim doesn't touch, doesn't affect. So too, and even more so, it is b'pnimi yisayinyanim. According to Chassidus, the Tzemach Tzedek explains that the Shabbosos, these Shabbosim in the time of Bein HaMetzarim, are on the level of makdim refuah l'maka. That means we know that Hashem always provides the cure before bringing the illness. In a similar way, the Shabbosim of the 3 weeks, these Shabbosim are like the refuah, they're the cure for the ideas of the Bein HaMetzarim. If this is the case regarding Shabbos, says the Rebbe, the same thing we understand, and even more so in regarding to the parshiyos of the Torah that we read during this time. Because we know that it says, Tzion b'mishpat ipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah, Tzion is redeemed through mishpat, and its captives brought back through tzedakah. What does mishpat refer to? Mishpat over here is referring to Torah. So Torah is what brings the geula. If so, it's understood that the parshiyos of the Torah that we learn and we read in this time are definitely this idea of the refuah that is coming even before and coming to help us with this makkah of galus. In other words, that these parshiyos are hira, are lessons, and it's in Askoyach giving us the ability to be able to do the avodah of Bein HaMetzarim, which is going to bring to the time when these days are going to be completely transformed. L'saseinu l'simcho l'moyadim tovim. Says the Rebbe, since all the inyanim of Torah are betachlis hadiyah, completely accurate and very, very precise, and this the Rebbe says is with a Mikolshkein from worldly things. In other words, if we know that everything in the world happens by Hashgacha Pratis and is precise, how much more so when it comes to matters of Torah? So it's understood that when the kviyus, when the setup is like this year, that Parshas Matos and Massei are mechubaris, are connected. So there's a special hayra and nesinas koyach for the avodah of Bein HaMetzarim. The idea simply, says the Rebbe, is in the years that Matos and Massei are separate, so then in the Bein HaMetzarim, what's read and what's learned is 3 sedris, 3 parshios for the 3 weeks: Matos, Massei, and Dvorim. However, when Matos and Massei are connected, so then we have in the Bein HaMetzarim weeks, we have an additional parsha in the Torah. We will also read Parshas Pinchas, because you have Pinchas in 1 week, then Matos, Massei, and then Dvorim. The Rebbe says in certain setups of the calendar, like the year that the Rebbe is saying the Sicha, you even have Parshas Balak, because in Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is Shabbos. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is the first day of the 3 weeks, but when that's Shabbos, so we now have an additional Shabbos, so that's Parshas Balak. Says the Rebbe, since in this period of time, when we have, as said, when Matos and Massei are being read together, and therefore these extra Parshas and Bein HaMetzarim, so there's so much more Torah being read during these times, it's understood that through this we get even a greater and stronger nesinas koyach to cure the inyanim of Bein HaMetzarim, and as said before, in a way of makdim, that the refuah comes even before, the cure comes even before the sickness. The Rebbe says it's also understood that this special nesinas koyach, the special ability that's given, is connected not only with the fact that we have much more Torah being read, but also more specifically with the ideas that the heroes of Matos and Parshas, Matos and Massei are being connected and combined because of their special connection to this time, as said before. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by first explaining the fact that when we have certain Shabbosim, when 2 sedros, when 2 Parshas or mechubaris are connected, so it doesn't mean that we're reading in one Shabbos 2 separate sedros, but rather they become connected now as one sedra. The Rebbe says this could be seen clearly from the fact that we don't read each parsha separately in a different time of Shabbos, but rather we read them together. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, when we read them together, how do we divide the aliyahs, the 7 people that are called up, and so too, how do we divide the sections of the parsha for learning chitas over the week? It's not in a way where you could see clearly the division between the 2 parshas. So that would be, let's say, by calling, because there are 7 aliyahs, so we'll divide it. So it will be 4 aliyahs in one parsha, in the first parsha, and then 3 in the second parsha, or something similar to that. But rather, when we read it in the Torah, and when we learn it, we take one aliyah revi, and that combines the end of the first sedra together with the beginning of the next one. And when the person getting the aliyah makes the brachos, he'll make the brachos before the beginning of that aliyah, which is part of the first parsha, and then he'll read and say the brachos after the aliyah on the section, after he reads the section of the second parsha. So it becomes completely one parsha altogether. And the Rebbe says, seemingly, if in fact they are 2 separate sedros, as the way they are in those years when the parshas are separate, so why is it that we didn't make some sort of separation, at least in the way we read it, even when it's together, but still to show that it's 2 separate parshas? That itself tells us that when the parshas are mechubaris, when they're connected, they are actually becoming one sedra. In other words, even though that each one does, of course, have its own idea and its own toich and its own content, because we know that the fact that the Torah is divided into 53 sedris means each one is something individual and distinct. Nevertheless, when we have this sort of kviyas, when we read them together, that means they're now becoming one parsha. And the Rebbe says, we need to understand how this works. Seemingly, if Parshas Matos and Massei don't seem so connected to each other at all. The Rebbe says, in some of the Parshas of the Torah, we know that one parsha is coming directly following the other parsha, either in time or in content. So we can understand the flow and the connection between 2 parshas. But in our case, in Parshas Matos and Massei, Parshas Matos is speaking about commands, and incidents that took place at the very, very end of the 40th year of the Yidden being in the Midbar. That's Parshas Matos. Whereas Parshas Massei, which starts off with these are the journeys of Bnei Yisrael, is sort of like a summary of all of the journeys and the things that happened there of the previous Sfarim of Shmois, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. This is really a parsha that encompasses approximately all 40 years of the desert. It's taking over. It's going through all of these years, the whole duration of the 40 years in the Midbar. So how do we understand this connection between these two parshas? So the Rebbe said, we discussed a number of times, many times, based on what the Baal Shem Tov teaches, that the name that something is called in Lashon HaKodesh is actually the chayas, is the vitality of that particular thing that is carrying the name. And the name actually hints to what it's all about. So too, says the Rebbe, is in regards to the name of the Parshiyas of the Torah, that the inner content of the whole Parsha is really expressed in the name of the Sedra. In our case, the Toichen, the point of what Parshas Matos is all about, is hinted in the name how it's called Al Pi Minig Yisrael, that it's called Matos, and so too in regards to Parshas Massei. What's the explanation? So the Rebbe first focuses on what the word Matos means. Generally, we find two titles of how Yidden are called when we're speaking about the tribes of the Yidden. There's two names for it. Shvatim and Matos. Both of them mean tribes. The difference between Shvatim and Matos could be understood also according to the meaning of the word as we look at it. Simply, what is the idea of a mate and a shevet? So they both are really a branch off a tree. But shevet is the twig or the branch as it's still soft and flexible, whereas mate is the stick or the rod as it's already become hard and strong. The reason for this difference is, says the Rebbe, because shevet is the kind of branch or the twig that still has some sort of that nourishment, sustenance from the tree. It still has some of, in other words, even if it's disattached, it still has some of that moisture in it. In fact, sometimes shevet is actually referring to the branch as it's still attached to the tree. And therefore, that's the reason why this branch is fresh and soft, as opposed to a mate, which is specifically after the branch is cut off, and it's no longer having any sort of yinika, any sort of sustenance, nourishment from the tree, and that is when it becomes completely strong and hard and so on. The Rebbe says we can now understand that the same thing is true in the two titles of how we call Yidden by Shvatim or Matos. Both Shvatim and Matos represent the idea that the Neshamas Yisrael are coming from a root, they're coming from a tree, they're coming from Elikus, which is the Ilana de La'ela, the supernal tree. So every Yid is like a branch of that tree. But Shvatim represents the Neshama as it's still connected with godliness in a more revealed way. As it's still standing with a dveikus, it's cleaving, it's connecting to Ilana de La'ela, the supernal tree. More generally, says the Rebbe, this is hinting to the Neshama, as the Neshama is up above, even before it came down into the body, where it stands with complete bittul, constant bittul, and dveikus to Elikus. That's what a shevet is about, and that's what the name Shvatim represent. On the other hand, Matos, this describes the Yidden, how in a more revealed way, they're not so connected to the source. It's not noticeable in a clear way, their dveikus, their connection to Elikus. Or in a more general way, says the Rebbe, this refers to the Neshama as it came down into the Guf and into the Nefesh HaBahamis. And through the descent in the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis, it became more physical, more materialistic. And it's as if it was separated from this supernal tree, from its original root. The Rebbe says, this is also, now going back to Parshas Matos, when we say that Parshas Matos is the name of the Parsha, it's hinting to the Neshamas Yisrael as they come down into this world, and as they became much more physical, as if there's something separate to their source. That's what Matos represents. So Matos is the descent of the Neshama into the world. Whereas the name Massei, which Massei is the idea that you're completely moving away from your previous place and you are coming to a higher place. Massei, the Yidden are journeying to Eretz HaKodesh, to the Holy Land. So in Avodas Hashem, this refers to the Nesiyah, the journey, the halicha, that the going that the neshama comes to as a result of the coming down here into this world, in a way of matos. In other words, as it came down here, the point was matos. It separated from its source. But the whole idea was that as a result of this yirida, as a result of this matos, as a result of this descent, the neshama is now going to be journeying to a level higher than it was before it came down. And that's what Massei represents, the journey. In other words, the neshama before it came down, it was called oimed, it was stationary, standing as if in one place, like that which malachim are called, because its way of serving Hashem with avas Hashem and yiras Hashem, love and awe of Hashem, was much more limited, and therefore even when it goes up to a higher level, it's not completely removed from its previous level, and therefore it's still always called by the name Amida. It's still always standing because it never really got away completely from its previous state. But specifically through the Yerida Lamata, specifically by coming down into the Guf, into the Nefesh HaBahamis, into the level which we call Matos, and through working with the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis, and with the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis doing Torah and Mitzvahs, which is Hashem's Chachma, Hashem's wisdom, and Hashem's Ratzon, the Ratzon of Hashem. Through this, the neshama comes to the level of Massei, to be able to journey, to become a mahalich, to be able to be someone who goes. Be'ein haroich, completely higher than the way the neshama was previously, as it was up above. So that is what Matos and Massei represent. Again, Matos representing that like a stick, a rod that was disattached from its tree, says the neshama, the way it came down here, Lamata. And Massei represents the aliyah that it has as a result of that, the journeying. The Rebbe says this is all in a general way. That the Yeridas HaNeshama, the descent of the Neshama, is hinted in Parshas Matos, and the schar, the reward, the aliyah, the ascent that it has, that's more about Parshas Massei. But more specifically, says the Rebbe, both in Parshas Matos and in Parshas Massei are hinted both the Yerida of the Neshama, the descent of the Neshama, as well as the Avoid of the Neshama, and also the reward and the Aliyah. So again, first the Rebbe divided in two general ways. Matos is the Yerida, Massei is the Aliyah. But now the Rebbe is going to look at each one of them. If we go more specifically, we'll find that each one of them actually have 3 points. Both of them have the same 3 points. So in Matos, we're going to speak about the descent of the neshama, the avoid of the neshama, and the reward of the neshama. It's aliyah. And also Massei is going to have the same 3 things. And the Rebbe explains that when we spoke about this idea of a mata being hard, being strong, is not only the fact that the neshama, because it now separated from elikus, so now that's the type of stick or rod that it is, a dry and therefore hard stick, etc. But it actually also represents the avodah of the neshama, the strength of the avodah that needs to be and that there is by the yid down here below, because he needs to overcome all of the disturbances of the guf and the nefesh habahamis, and certainly of the world. So this is why the neshama needs to stand with a very great strength, that of, similar to a mata, to that stick, a strong rod, not to be nispal, not to be affected by all of these concealments, and to be able to overcome them. So that's this. So again, we had first of all, the neshama itself is called like a mata because it came down here. That's the yerida. It also has the strength of the mata to be able to overcome the concealments. And now comes point number 3, the reward. When a yid down here in this world does his avodah and Torah and mitzvahs with a strength, not to be nispal from all of these concealments, so then his reward is also in a way of mata. What is the idea of a mata? Again, the strength of the mata, that he's now going to reach, the neshama is going to reach a certain strength that comes from the very, very highest level, the root of the neshama. This is called in Chassidus the Eson of the neshama. The deepest part of the neshama is called Eson, which Eson again means strength and strong. So even more than the neshama had when it was l'mayla. When the neshama was l'mayla, we said it was like a shevet, which is attached, but it's soft. But the deepest part of the neshama, the root of the neshama, is called Asa, which means it has a very great strength. So the reward of coming down here and working with strength is that the ultimate strength of the neshama is revealed. So that's all seen in the word matos. The Rebbe says the same thing is also hinted in Massei. We said generally again, Massei is the reward, but the Rebbe is now going to look that Massei really includes also all these three things. Massei is in the plural. So it hints, first of all, on the journey of the neshama. We said before how it's the ascent, but now the Rebbe is including more things. There are also hints to the journey of the neshama from above down below into this world. So that's number one, that's the descent. Then number two is the fact that the Yid down here in this world, the avodah that he has, is also in a way of a journey, that he's constantly going higher and higher from one level to the next. That's the way his avodah needs to be. He's constantly striving to go higher and higher. And finally, the reward, as we said before, is that the neshama achieves the ultimate masay, that advantage that the neshama has over the malach, as we said, that it becomes in a way of a mahalich, that it's going now, not only stationary, standing in one place. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the connection between Parshas Matos-Massei to the time of Bein HaMetzorim. Because this whole idea of this chiddush that we just said about Matos and Massei, the fact that the neshama needs to come down here in this world, and it's specifically over here that it stands so strongly against all of the hardships of the world, and so too the main reward that comes as a result of this. Says the Rebbe, all of this is true always, but it's more so, not just because of the neshama coming down into this world, but it's even stronger the case, and mainly when we speak about the descent in the time of Golus. And that's what Bein HaMetzorim is all about, the time of the 3 weeks. And the Rebbe explains why that is. Regarding the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when as the Mishnah said that Asaron Nisim Nasu Lavisein of the Beis HaMikdash, they were constantly seeing godliness. 10 miracles were happening in the Beis HaMikdash in the way that the Yidden were able to see this. So the Yidden were able to see and hear godliness in an open way. And therefore they were standing more naturally with the way of bitul, nullification, dveikos, cleaving to Hashem. The Rebbe quotes the Gemara that says, Kederech sheba lirois, kach ba lirois, that a Yid came to the Beis HaMikdash, and Hashem sees him, but he was also coming to see Hashem. And the avodah then was in a way of av of a yira, with love, with fear to Hashem. So in this case, you can't really call it that they were on the level of matos, completely separated from the tree. On the contrary, you call them shevet. They are like that softer branch, which is still connected to the root, to the body of the tree. And this is also why at that point they also didn't need that special strength to be able to do their Torah and mitzvahs. And if they don't have that special strength, that third point is also missing. They're not going to have that Eisen Sheba Neshama revealed, which we called that the reward. In other words, at the highest level of the Neshama is now going to be revealed. But in the time of Galus, when you cannot see godliness, when godliness is not so much sensed as in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there are so many concealments on Elikus. This is why we said the Yidden are called Matos, because we don't see so much their connection, their Dveikus to Elikus. This is exactly why that's when they need to reveal a much greater strength to be able to overcome all the obstacles, all the challenges for the Avodah of Torah and Mitzvahs, especially if you want to be able to transform the darkness of the Golus into light. So again, number one, there is their own descent in the time of Golus. They also need to use much greater strength like the Matos. And this is also why the reward is also in a way of Matos, that strength of the Etzem HaNeshama, the essence of the Neshama, is revealed even more than in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and even more than in the time in the way the Neshama was up above. And in a way of, this reward is in a way of Massei, as we said, that it becomes the real halicha, the real movement of the Neshama, as opposed to just standing stationary in one place. And the same thing, the other aspects that we said are all really the same three ideas are also seen in the word Massei. So this idea of Matos and Massei is even more true when we speak about the Yid coming down in the time of Golus. Says the Rebbe, up until here we discussed, what we discussed till now is true even when Matos and Massei are separate, each one read for themselves. That means when they're not mechubaris. But most years, says the Rebbe, when Matos and Massei do come together, we have an additional Hayra and Usinas Koyach, which each one of them is poil also on the other. In other words, then there's an extra Usinas Koyach that the avodah should be even in a greater way, but on the other hand, also in an easier way we should be able to do it. And the Rebbe explains, in other words, that each one, what Matos is going to add to Massei, and what Massei is going to add to Matos. The Rebbe says, in the idea of Matos, that means Matos again mainly refers to the Yerida in Golus, but what it's emphasized together with the Matos, that it's really about a Massei. What does it mean that it's a Massei? That Hashem is the one that actually caused this all to happen. Just like the journeys in the Midbar in the simple sense, as the Pasuk says, where Al Pi Hashem Yisrael, that the Yidden were traveling the whole time constantly based on the instructions of Hashem. Hashem is the one that made him travel from one place to the other. The same thing, our Yerida in Golus is Al Pi Hashem. And therefore it gives us an extra encouragement, an extra strength in our Avodah in Golus. The same thing is true. That's as far as the Yerida aspect of Matos. We said there's three things. As far as the Avodah aspect of Matos, that we say we need to act in a strong way. What does it mean when it comes together with Massei? That we have the Nesinas Koyach of the Torah. That in any single thing that the Yid does in his Avodah in the time of Golus, there should always be that strength of Matos, but in a way of Massei. That means not only do we have the strength itself, but going higher and higher within that strength of Matos. So that's regarding the second point. And regarding the third point that we said, the reward aspect of Matos, which is the revelation of the Shoresh HaNeshama. So again, the revelation of the Shoresh HaNeshama, which we said is Matos, that very strong part of the Neshama, but is also in a way of Massei. Meaning to say, going even higher into the highest roots of the Neshama, so that Sof, ultimately it's an aliyah that reaches to such a strength that's even higher than the strength of the root of the neshama. Massei means that strength itself, we're going higher, so to speak, even beyond the root of the neshama. What does that mean? Because the strength of the root of the neshama is ultimately still limited to a certain extent. But when we say that a person has the true avodah of matos in the time of galus, so then the neshama is elevated to something that's even beyond the neshama. It goes into the level of a likus that's completely bligvul, as the expression is, li'ishta'ava begufa de malka, to become completely drawn in or absorbed in the body of Hashem, so to speak, that it becomes one thing kavayochel with atzmos. And the same thing is the other way around, that within the Massei, within the reward of the neshama, which we said is generally Massei represents that journey, that reward of the neshama, but it's not that it comes in a completely separate time. That means it's going to be sometimes in the future, but Massei together with Matos is telling us that it's together with Matos. That as the Yid is down here in this world, right now, he already has this halicha v'aliyah, he's already able to go and to ascend to these highest levels. Says the Rebbe, based on this we're going to understand the connection of these two ideas, that specifically when Parshas Matos and Massei are mechubaros, we said that also causes that Parshas Pinchas is read in the Bein HaMtzorim. And sometimes, again, as the Kviyos of the year, the Rebbe was saying, the Sicha, even Parshas Balak. What's the idea? Says the Rebbe, because this is really coming to answer a question. Seemingly one could ask, how is it really possible to demand by a Yid that in every single journey that he takes should be with this tremendous strength of Matos? There are so many different types of journeys by Yidden throughout their lives. There are differences between aliyos and yeridos. Sometimes you're on the way up, on the way down, to the extent that it goes from one extreme to another, and yet you're expecting the Yid to always be standing with that greatest strength. And the Rebbe says, all would be understood if we're holding by that journey, as the pasuk says, "Vayisu me'Ramses," when they're starting to journey out of Mitzrayim, when the Yidden are biyad ramo le'enei kol Mitzrayim, going with a outstretched hand, with a strong hand, going out of Mitzrayim. In other words, the Yidden are at their height, at their peak. We can understand how you can be standing strong. Or if we're speaking about the journey that's leading to Midbar Sinai, going to Har Sinai, we can understand that. Then we could demand from the Yid that he should have that strength to be able to journey higher and higher in his avodah. The question, however, is, how can we really demand by a Yid that same strength when he's holding by a journey, for example, from a place, one of the places in the Chumash is called a Risma. And why is it called Risma? So it's explained that this is because of the Lashon Hara of the Meraglim, which is related to this word Risma. Or a place called Avel Hashitim, which was connected with the Aveira of Baal Pa'or. How could the Yid hold by that same strength then? So the answer for this is Parshas Pinchas. When the strength in the Avodah of the Yid is only coming based on his own mitzias, on his own, the way he is on his own, since a person is a finite and limited person, so yes, it's true he wouldn't be able to have that same strength in all of these journeys. However, when the toikef, when your avodah is similar to the way it was by Pinchas, regarding whom it says, Bekanoi Eskinosi, that he avenged Hashem's anger. He stood up with Mesiras Nefesh practically in front of all of Am Yisrael. So when by a Yid, there is this idea of this Mesiras Nefesh, the Poyel, he has this as an introduction to all of his avodah, he's going out of his mitzvahs. It's not about him. He's standing in the way of Mesiras Nefesh. Then there's absolutely no difference for him in whatever journey he might be holding. He's always acting, and he's always carrying through the tzivui of Hashem with the absolute greatest strength. The Rebbe says, well, this is also understood, that the Shleimus HaChibur, that ultimate connection of this avodah of Matos together with the avodah of Massei, is specifically accomplished when we're reading Parshas Pinchas, also in this same time, in Bein HaMetzorim. Especially again, says the Rebbe, if we look at the Kviyas of the year that the Rebbe was saying, the Sicha was Shivasa B'Tammuz was Shabbos. So you also have Parshas Balak. So the idea over here is, because in Parshas Pinchas was speaking really about Hashem's reward for what Pinchas did. But in Parshas Balak, we actually have the story itself of what Pinchas did, along with his Mesiras Nefesh. Because again, it's this story of Pinchas that is in his way of avodah that explains to us and gives us the koyach of how we could really combine this idea of Matos and Massei together. The Rebbe says Pinchas answers another question. We could also ask the question of Matos and Massei. One question was regarding Matos, regarding the strength that was expected of us in the time of Galus. But the same question could also be asked regarding the schar, the reward, the Massei aspect. How could the neshama, especially as it comes down here in the time of Bein HaMetzorim, in the time of Galus, how could it reach this level of Massei to this greatest strength of the neshama? And we say that it's go even higher than it is in the Shoydish neshama, in the way it's in the root of the neshama, all the way up above. And furthermore, we say that it should be able to shine in the neshama as the neshama is in the time of Galus, which we said that's the Matos aspect. And the question is, seemingly, regarding the schar of the avodah of B'chol Moedecha. When a neshama works and does all of its avodah, to which a neshama comes usually through its coming down here into this world, especially in a time of Golus. So usually we say that b'misason royin, it's only once a person passes away after he had refined his guf, his nefesh habahamis, he did his avodah of his skafia, his hapcha, bending the nefesh habahamis and transforming it. Then after he passes away, he gets the reward. But usually we say it's not during a person's lifetime. So here again we have the answer, Parshas Pinchas, that we read before the Bein HaMetzorim. Or rather, we read it before, even within the Bein HaMetzorim, again, according to this Kviyas. That is, that as long as the person, again, is serving Hashem only because of his own mitzias, even his avodah is in the highest level, but he's still not going out of himself, out of the limitations of a nivra, so then you're right, then it can't be that he'll reach to this level that's going higher than the Shoydish HaNeshama as he's down here. But when his avodah is again like Pinchas, with Mesiras Nefesh Mamish, completely the opposite of nature, so then he goes out of this category of being called nivra, of being called a creation, and even out of the limitation, so to speak, of the neshama the way it was, in its highest and original root, which is, at the end of the day, still some sort of Metzias, and not yet Atzmus. But rather, now, if it goes out of its complete Metzias, we said through Mesiras Nefesh, it does become Kvayachol. One with Atzmus, as the Pasuk says, V'ruach toshav Elo Elokim Asher Nesana, the spirit goes back to within Hashem, Hashem that has given it into the guf. And because of this avoid of Mesiras Nefesh B'poel Mamish, you have the complete birur, the complete purification of the guf and the nefesh habahamis. And therefore the neshama, even as it's here in this world, and even in the time of Galus, it could sense and it could have that ilui, that halicha, that bli gvul of Massei, to which the neshama reaches through its avodah. The Rebbe says, as mentioned earlier, there's also another special inyan that when we read Matos and Massei together, we sometimes have this idea, like the Kviz, again, that the Rebbe is saying, the Sicha, that the first day of Bein HaMetzorim, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and so too the last day, which is Tisha B'Av, will fall out on Shabbos. And Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, as we said, is Parshas Balak. Says the Rebbe, the explanation of this, and the connection to the previous explanation that we were speaking about in the connection of Matos and Massei. The Rebbe says, the main purpose of the neshama coming down here generally, especially in the time of Golus, as we called it, this Matos idea, is as the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, brings from the Eitz Chaim, that the neshama itself doesn't need any fixing up, any correction at all. The whole reason the neshama came down here is only to fix and to deal with the guf and the nefesh habahamis and to the portion that's connected to this person's neshama from the general world. From this we also understand that the main avoid of the strength that we've been speaking about, this matos idea, and so too the real reward that the yid gets of the matos and the massei in his avoida down here, is not only the fact that the neshama is able to overcome the guf and the nefesh habahamis and the darkness of the golus, and in other words, that this is all things that the neshama is accomplishing, but rather the main point is the avoid of iskafia and ishapcha of the nefesh habahamis, and even more so the darkness of the world, the darkness of the galus, which is, in other words, things that are even outside of our nefesh habahamis. Because, says the Rebbe, the strength that the neshama has in coming down here, and even the strength that it accomplishes, and that's accomplished as a result of the blockages, the concealments of the nefesh habahamis and the world, ultimately, all of that is not such a chidush by the nefesh halikis, because the neshama, in its very essence, is really godly and actually enjoys godliness, and therefore there's not the real halicha or aliyah going completely in the most perfect way out of itself into atzmus mamish, because it still is somewhat involved in its own sort of avodah. When, however, we utilize the matos, the strength, to bend and even to transform the nefesh habahamis into good, which this is completely opposite of its nature. And through this, the whole nefesh habahamis is sort of losing even who he was, what it was. Especially when we have the transformation also of the darkness of the galus. So this causes the real shleim, is the ultimate and greatest strength in aliyah bli gvul, even in the nefesh halikis itself. The nefesh halikis also gains from that in a way of b'chol moedecha, even more than the moed of the nefesh halikis itself. So again, the nefesh halikis still had some sort of connection to godliness before, so it didn't go out of its limitations completely, but when it achieves this with the nefesh habahamis, then the nefesh halikis gains in a way that goes completely beyond anything. And through this, he becomes kavayachol, one with atzmos. Says the Rebbe, according to this, we're going to understand the chidush that Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the first day of Bein HaMetzorim, falls out on Shabbos Parshas Balak. The general idea and the purpose of the Bein HaMetzorim is that ultimately should be v'hafachti evlam l'sasner, Hashem will transform all of the mourning into happiness. The days of fasting itself will be transformed l'sasner and l'simcha. The Rebbe says that via shloima, that this is actually also hinted in the fact that Hashem says to the Navi Yirmiyah, he shows him a makel shaked, a branch from a tree of almonds, and he says that the idea is, shaked is from the word of also meaning speed and haste, because shoyked ani al dvari la'asosi, I'm going to bring my words very quickly. Which, as Chazal tell us, this is a remez to the 21 days of the 3 weeks. Because just like there's 21 days in the 3 weeks, this is similar to the 21 days that it takes from the blossoming of the almonds until it's completely ready. Says the Rebbe, but Hashem over here is hinting not only to that which is the opposite of good, but mainly, says the Rebbe, that Hashem is hinting to the whole purpose of it all, that it should be makel shakeh, this branch from the almond tree, l'mal yuso, in the positive way, in the good side, as the Alter Rebbe explains regarding parach matei arin, when arin stick blossoms into Shkedim. That the reason is because it's coming to show on the speed and the great, strong hashpah coming from Hashem into this world. So the Rebbe now goes back and says, therefore, when we have Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and also Tisha B'Av falling out on Shabbos, like the Kviyas of the year the Rebbe is saying the Sicha, and we know that Shabbos pushes off that fast. So in addition to the fact that Shabbos is changing the day of Bein HaMetzarim into a day that you need to have Simcha and Oineg, it's similar to the idea of Hafachti Evlam L'Sosain. Especially, says the Rebbe, that we know that really this is generally the whole idea of what Shabbos is all about. It says in the Toras Kohanim, on the pasuk Mizmor Shir Liyoim HaShabbos. What does Yom HaShabbos refer to? It refers to the time that Mashbis Mazikim in Oilam, that Hashem is going to be removing all harmful things of the world. The Tzemach Tzedek explains this, that really the shleimus of Shabbos is all about transforming all the negative things, all the harmful things, into good. And something similar to this was already in the very first Shabbos of creation. And that was able to be seen by Gashmi Yismamish. Chazal tell us that during the first Shabbos, there was no darkness. The light of that Shabbos was for 36 hours straight. There was light. That means that Shabbos, so going Friday night and Shabbos. That means that Shabbos B'Shleimus is really all about accomplishing the Ishapcha, transformation of the days of Bein HaMetzarim. Because the whole idea of Shabbos, the Shleimus of Shabbos, as it was in the beginning of creation, is to transform the darkness of the night into light. The Laila Kayoim Yoir, in a similar way, transforming the Golus and Bein HaMetzarim into happiness, transforming the darkness into light. Says the Rebbe, and therefore, what follows then is that when Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, right in the beginning of Bein HaMetzarim, falls out on Shabbos, immediately you have this idea of Makdim Refuah L'Maka, Hashem's cure coming before the Bein HaMetzarim, transforming these days right from the beginning. And therefore this makes it even easier that the avodah of the person in the Bein HaMetzarim, this avodah of Matos-Massei, and as they are together, should be in a much easier way, this avodah of transforming the Nefesh HaBahamis and the Golus. Says the Rebbe, so too, because of the Parsha of the Torah that's now added, Parshas Balak. Because what's the idea of Parshas Balak? Are the brachos of Bilam, which came in a way that Hashem didn't want to listen to Bilam. He transformed the curses into blessings. Says the Rebbe, so here again we have the Chiddush that not only that Hashem transforms the curses into blessings, but also the idea that it comes through Bilam specifically. He is the one that's the complete Klippa, the opposite of Moshe. He's the one that's the ultimate opposite of Kedusha. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, the very ending of his Nevuah is regarding the Acharis Hayamim, the time of the Geula through Mashiach Tzidkenu. As the Rambam explains, which will take out the Yidden from the Golus, from the Bein HaMetzarim completely. And when all of these things come together, we have Matos and Massei connected. And therefore, as we said, we'll also read Parshas Pinchas and Bein HaMetzarim. And especially in the Kviyas of the year, that the beginning of Bein HaMetzarim is Shabbos. And Parshas Balak is also read. So that hastens even more the Yehavchu Yamim Eilu L'Sasinu L'Simcha. That from the Makel Shoked should be the Shkida, the hastening for the good, the bringing close the Geula in a quick way. That it should be Shakadati Lahachnis, Bonai La'eretz Yisrael Miyada, that Hashem is working, so to speak, to hasten, to bring the Yidden as quickly as possible into Eretz Yisrael. B'shaitachad u'berigachad, should be the Geula through Mashiach Tzidkenu L'mata, me'asar atfachim.